afternoon, everyone. I'm Becky Hogue, and I welcome you to Books Between Bites, and I see a lot of familiar faces, but hopefully we have some new people today, some past speakers and some future speakers I see in the audience today. And I just want to welcome you again, remind you this is our 33rd season of Books Between Bites, and I have a sign-up sheet if you would like to be on our email list. I send out an email to everyone on it just before the upcoming program. And then in August, I'll tell you what's coming up for the new season. So I'm going to set it over here, and if you're not on our email list, please sign up, and I'll be happy to just once a month send you an email. And now I'm going to have George introduce our speaker today. George Sheets, our senior,
Who are you, George?
he's the director. I don't shortchange his title.
I wasn't sure where she was going with that.
I had to look at your tag.
Oh, that's why I wear it. I am George Sheets. I just celebrated my 15th anniversary in Batavia on December 30th. I'm very happy to be here. The best move I ever made in my whole life is to come to Batavia, Illinois. First thing I'm going to ask you is to take out your cell phone and put it on silent, or put it on airplane mode or whatever, as a courtesy to our speaker. And I just did that myself because I often forget, and I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to be the one whose ringer goes off in the middle of Daniel's talk. And I also want to mention that this is 2020, as you know, and this is not only the Olympics year, but it's also the decennial census year for the United States of America. And Census Day is April 1st, and along around mid-March, everyone's going to get a postcard in the mail because it's possible to complete the census form, which is about, the basic form is like 10 questions online using a tablet or a computer. And we're going to be at the library providing access to tablets and computers for people that want to come in and do that here. But I just want to encourage everyone to respond to that notification and to complete the census form. Amazingly, a very high percentage of people did not complete the form 10 years ago, and the census count translates into federal money for the community. Even the library gets a grant from the state library each year that we apply for that's based on our population in the library district. So if we don't have an accurate count, we're losing out on money for 10 years. And the hardest groups to count include seniors, of which I'm in that category now, and also children, especially children under the age of 5. So many of your grandchildren might not have been counted last time. So it's confidential. The information cannot be released for 72 years. Only the statistical data is used to determine population counts and things like that. So I just want to encourage you, and you'll hear more reminders from the library and other agencies in the city as time goes by, but the census is almost upon us. Now, for the reason that you really came here today is we have a wonderful speaker today, Daniel Russo, a longtime both teacher and director at the library, or LRC, as you might know it, at the high school. He is now a member of the Batavia Public Library Board of Trustees, which we're very happy about. And I know that he wants to say some more things about himself, so I've been, trying to decide what I should say and what I shouldn't say. So what I think I'll do is just ask you to give a very warm welcome to Daniel Russo.
Well, Well, good afternoon, and I do want to thank you very much for coming. I'm really happy to talk about this book, which is a passion of mine, so I'll jump right in. But I do want to just start by saying I was elected to the library board last year, and the library board, one of my goals in running was to try and connect the board with people. So in the lobby, you maybe have noticed a picture of the library board members, and we're busy working on maintenance of the library building. We're looking at the lending library that the library has. You probably heard about the CAPE cans that are now being loaned, and there's a bunch of other things that are coming. So the board is very busy, but we would love to hear from you. So please, whenever you have ideas, do stop one of the board members and let us know what you're thinking. So for the talk today, before I get into the book, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am a lifelong collector, which means back in high school when it was time to do speech class and everybody had to give a speech, I thought certainly there was nothing better than antique clocks. And you can imagine that actually wasn't as exciting as I thought it was, but it was a really good talk. This actually was one of my first clocks. I don't know why. I was interested in antiques, but I was. So in high school, I put up a tag at the Jewel on the way in and said I wanted to buy clocks. And this was actually, one person called, and this was the clock that they had. And it's actually incredible. It's really very interesting. Maybe if you notice in the lower left-hand corner, there's a handle there. This was actually a time clock used in a business. And so you slid your time card in the black area, push the handle down, and it printed the time. One of the things that the book is going to talk about, but I'll mention it here, is just how important that research idea is, learning about your object. And so this was made by the International Time Recording Company of Endicott, New York, which probably doesn't mean too much to people, but it eventually became IBM, which is a company that probably you have heard of. Another really cool thing about this clock is that there's a sales label on it. It was sold by the Old Boston store in Chicago, and it's dated like 1910, I think, which at the time really surprised me. That pendulum clock, when I was in high school, I didn't think people really had pendulum clocks in 1910, but they did. So that was my first antique. And then in college, I remember, I think it was an Anita Gold column. She wrote for the Tribune, she was a syndicated columnist, and she wrote about these beehive candlesticks that were made, 1870, 1880, up to about 1900. And, what's so interesting about them is at the bottom, underneath the candlestick, there's a little push-up, a little rod, and the wax was so valuable that you wouldn't want to waste that 1 inch of wax that would be in the top of it, so you'd push it up at the bottom and you could use everything. So that I thought was really interesting. I did go to a couple shows, when I could. They were incredibly expensive at the time. And I knew that by the time I could afford them, that there would be no more left to collect. Well, that isn't true anymore, and we'll talk more about that. As George said, I was the Learning Center director at Batavia High School and a teacher there for 38 years. And when it came time for me to retire, I opened up first a case in an antique mall, and then I did move to a whole booth. So in the description for today's program, I said, and I want to caution you now, that I have 3 years of experience in the antique business, so you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt. I know many of you have much more experience, and it's a complicated business, actually. So where I'm at is Old Timers Antique Center in Sandwich, Illinois. And just in case some of you have not been to an antique mall, there's several different things that you're going to find. And this is a very large antique mall, so it's actually 3 different stories. One thing that you'll find is cases. And cases are great for displaying a lot of small things, but you have to have somebody come and open up the case so that you can touch it. And touching it is really, really important. We'll talk more about that later on. But our antique mall, it has about 140 dealers. Some of the dealers are in cases, and then on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see one of the booths. And this might be pretty typical of what you think of for an antique show or an antique mall. But our mall also has a furniture room and a bargain basement. So off on the left, you see a really interesting piece of pretty modern furniture. I would call it pretty modern, and kind of that Danish modern, all enclosed, very tight. So there's things like that in the furniture room, as well as Victorian and all other kinds of furniture. And then in the basement is the bargain basement, where everything is 50% off. And this is actually a headboard from a bed, which was probably made about 1880. It was actually, the grain on it is not the wood grain, that's a painted on grain. And that decoration was done, they call it cottage style. If you had a cheaper wood, and maybe not even necessarily a cheap wood, but they did like painting grain on top of natural grain. But the painting style was often used for less expensive furniture. But it's actually, I think, amazing, the artistry as well as something from 1880, and this is actually very inexpensive right now. And that's going to be a theme throughout the whole talk, that, you know, it's not a great time for antiques. Back to the antique mall, the upstairs is what they call country gatherings, and this is actually a mix of old and new things. So you see other things that are popular right now, you know, all the way from umbrellas to purses to books and country style things on the right. So at Old Timers, the first floor is really regular antiques, bargain things in the basement, upstairs that mix of old and new. And then I included just this last slide, just to illustrate that there are newer type things. This mid-century modern type stuff, I don't like because I grew up with it, but it is really popular right now. This is something, you know, which is that a lot of young people have an interest in, and that's so important. We need kids to be interested in antiques, and they can be interested in antiques for all kinds of different reasons, and we'll talk about that. So the book, Killer Stuff, Tons of Money, it actually came out with 2 different subtitles: An Insider's Look at the World of Flea Market Antiques and Collecting, or the original title, Seeking History and Hidden Gems in Flea Market America. And the author is Maureen Stanton. And in 2000, a college friend of hers needed a couch to sleep on before going to an auction. And her college friend is the main character in the book. she calls him Avery, which is not his real name, but it's what she uses for the book because he didn't want, the publicity that would come from being known. In 2003, she went with him to the Brimfield show, which is an important antique show, and she was hooked. And she was so hooked by this world that she discovered that she started writing the book. In 2007, several years later, there was no interest in her book at all. She couldn't sell it. And then in 2009, what had happened, you can kind of see, is that Antique Roadshow had started, Pickers had started, and really her estimate was about 43 other shows, and now finally she had several offers for the book. So Antique Roadshow stimulated a lot of interest in antiques, but there were some other things that did as well, and we'll talk about that. Finally, in 2011, her book was published. So the book is pretty old now, and we'll talk a little bit about how that's dated. So here's a picture of the author, Maureen Stanton, and I think this is actually, the guy in the red shirt is kind of a stand-in for the antique dealer, Kurt Avery. She never does reveal his name, but she does make a point of saying that she really hasn't combined characters to make them more interesting. She may have changed their names, but these are really the people that she encountered. So her website has a whole bunch of different things if you're interested in reading more about them. So what I did for the talk is actually pick out some of the chapter titles, and then I'll talk about those. So the book really opens with Treasure Hunter, the Reality. And here we learn a little bit more about Avery. He started out as an archaeologist, and by archaeologist, he means a bottle digger. I grew up in Chicago, so we didn't have this, but my wife's family, who's from Wisconsin, they had a well. And the well, when you didn't need something in the house anymore, you threw it in the well. So when your pottery broke, you threw it in the well. And when they didn't want their piano anymore, they chopped it up and put it in the well. And that's what Avery discovered, is this treasure load of stuff. All of these bottles and pots and jars, and it just keeps on going. So he started out as this amateur archaeologist and found all of these cool bottles, and he started selling them, when he was a young boy. He was a wrestler. He wrestled in college, and he eventually became a biochemist, and he hated it. So even though he worked as a biochemist, he was accepted to Yale Medical School, which is pretty impressive, but he left that to become a mover, a household mover. And so he was moving stuff and eventually got a job at an auction house being a runner, which also means moving stuff. But he got to touch all this stuff. He got to see all the furniture and move it around and see what people bid on, and all the other things that sold at an auction. And so eventually he became an antique dealer. And I like this quote from the book. He says, it's like giving up on a normal life and running away with the circus. And the reason he says that is that he's an antique dealer who works shows. So antique shows happen when everybody else is not working. So you have to work when everybody works, on the weekends. And of course, maybe the show is Saturday and Sunday, but you have to move all that stuff there. So you have to pack up your truck and set it out and stay there for 2 hours or 2 days at the show, and then pack it all up again and drive it home again. And Avery is married, he has kids, his wife works a normal job, she has insurance so that he can do the things that he does. This Brimfield show is actually a half-mile long around Route 20. It started in the 1950s. There's thousands of dealers. There's 8 miles of traffic, I'm told. I have not seen it, but I've talked to a couple of people who are there. The town is really small, but it swells to thousands when this is going on. And it is called an antique show, but it's also called an antique flea market. And you can imagine, compared to an indoor show, when it rains, you get wet and you get muddy and all of those things as well. This is a picture from the author's website, and it's actually a little movie clip, and you can kind of tell there's so much excitement at this show that these people are running. When the gates open, they run because everybody knows the best deals happen in the first hour of the show, so you have to get around really fast. Some people have bicycles. Maybe if you go to Kane County Flea Market, you see people with chairs that they're pulling and wagons that they're pulling. And part of especially what was going on in 2011 or 2008-7 when she was writing the book was the economy had crashed at that time, and so people really got interested in buying things cheaply. So flea markets and resale shops really increased a lot at that time. So another chapter in the book says an antique dealer is made. It's a long education. You really don't start until you spend $100. I can remember the first time I broke the $100 mark. It was traumatizing. It's one thing finding these jars and bottles in the backyard or in somebody else's well pit, but to actually spend your $100 and not know whether or not you can sell it is, pretty traumatizing. And so sprinkled throughout the whole book, it's really a fun book to read because you learn so much history. He talks about stuff in every single chapter. So one of the things he talks about is one of his early great finds. It's a 1-quart butter mold. Butter churn, and it's actually rare. He bought it at $40. He sold it for $200, and his profit was $160. So this is amazing. How could you do any better than this? The thing that helped him make this money was that he knew that this small size butter churn was very rare. They made the small size, but people realized that it's just as much to make 1 quart as 2 quarts, so the smaller one, they stopped making it, and it wasn't very popular. So there aren't a lot of those around. So he's talking about how you're made. It's a long education, and there he did really well. But he gives some other examples. He bought a stool. He doesn't say how much he bought it for. He sold it for $250, and it was worth $2,000. So he figured that was a $1,700 lesson that he learned. And even though he's been doing this for 20 years, he's still learning those lessons. Another example that he bought, that he talked about, was an inkwell. He bought it for $600, sold it for $900, and it was worth $3,800. So that lesson cost him $3,200. And this is a theme throughout the book. One of the things about Avery that the author describes is that he's really somebody very fair. It's hard when you don't know values and an antique dealer sells at whatever price, you question how they got that price. And he does not try to get every penny out of the antiques that he sells. He really tries to be fair with people. So we'll learn more about that. But notice that picture of that butter churn. I got that off the internet. All of the pictures were my pictures, or I got them off the internet. So there are no pictures in the book. These aren't the actual objects, but they're as close as I could find. But this picture in particular, which I got from the internet, I want to just have you notice, because we're going to come back to that at the end. Okay, anybody know what this is?
Sugar bucket.
Sugar bucket, good. Another name for it is a firkin. And this is one of the few times that the book goes into philosophy. And it says that collecting is an effort to transcend the ephemerality of experience. And how many of you are collectors? Okay, yeah, a lot of people. And that is I thought that was a really good sentence, that we do want to preserve that thing that could potentially not be around for a long time. This firkin, the reason, or how it connects with the story is that the author has been shopping with the antique dealer for a long time, over a number of years. And you remember the title of the book is Killer Stuff. And the author, Maureen, she says, after shopping for hours, I began to recognize which antiques are common and which are rare. Level stuff is everywhere. And that kind of...
We're going to...
Sure.
It's not quite as long, but...
That's fine. Okay. Okay, so after shopping for hours, I begin to recognize which things are rare. The level stuff is everywhere. And that's one of the real intangibles that antique dealers recognize. And one of the things for him in particular, Avery, he really is, an upper middle or lower upper level antique dealer, way outside of anything that I do, even outside of things that are in this area. He's on the East Coast, so they do have things, from the late 1600s and 1700s. Most of our antiques, 1840, 1850, are about as old as we commonly get, though of course stuff moves around. But another thing that antique dealer has to do is recognize that killer stuff, because level stuff is everywhere. The other thing is that this is his business. I do it part-time. A lot of people at the mall that I belong to, they do it part-time, but this really is his business. He's trying to eke out a livelihood and support his family. So he really depends on having that killer stuff that will get him into the very best antique shows. Now, here's two lamps before we talk about anything. Which is the real one and which is the fake one? All right, yeah. The audience said the left is real. And here's another chapter from the book in which the author talks about the look. And here's a quote from Southern Living at Home which is the catalog arm of Southern Living magazine, and they may not actually even be in business too much anymore. But some people from the Southern Living at-home catalog came to one of the antique shows that Avery was at, and they bought some of his stuff. They bought a lemonade set, and they bought a sugar bowl, a silver sugar bowl. And what they were going to do, they really liked the look, so they bought the items, they were going to send them to China to have them reproduced, and then Southern Living at Home was going to sell the cheap reproductions. And that's a really good example of what you have here. The lamp on the right is, from a mass market store. I just found it on the internet, and the one on the left is an actual antique with a Quasal shade. And Quasal was somebody who worked in competition with Tiffany. So it's not as well known, but that's a very high quality shade. And there is about a $3,100 difference between the two lamps. And we each have to decide whether it's worth the $3,100 for that difference. But there really is a difference. It's beautiful. You can see that the metal is much more high quality. The glass is really much more high quality. And it's already lasted over 100 years. But this quote from the catalog says, "We've taken great care to recreate the classic style, using modern materials to offer you the look and feel of treasured antiques at a fraction of the cost." Whoa. And when we're shopping, so many times the descriptions say antique inspired, modeled after distressed antique style, skillfully crafted. Skillfully crafted, and yet, here's some firkins, some modern firkins, and, there's a lot of different ideas. People use antiques for inspiration. Some people try to copy, to resell. Some are blatant reproductions. So there's a lot going on there, but we do just see this all over the place. And, one of the comments from the book is, people who might have purchased antiques are now satisfied with reproductions. They don't want the substantive object, the unique, the real, but they are happy with something that on the surface looks like an antique. And especially, the book was written in 2011. Antiques were really, really hot in the past, and when they're hot, that inspires those reproductions. But there are those substantial differences in quality and workmanship. Here's just a real quick history of antiques. Before 1876, objects were so precious that you just kept them and used them, and you wouldn't even think about it. But for the centennial celebration, there started to become an interest in old-time artifacts. So people started looking at them a little bit more as artwork. In the 1920s, there was a craze. That's when the magazine Antiques started, and the Metropolitan Museum of Arts opened the American Wing. And that was the beginning of the time when Americans began to recognize that American antiques were important. Before that, English antiques were more valued than American antiques. Now in this country, we value our own antiques probably more than English antiques. The 1960s and the 1970s were that big boom, and that's when I didn't think I would ever be able to get a pair of brass candlesticks. I remember round oak tables. in college. I went to somebody's house because everybody was refinishing. So you'd buy stuff that wasn't in real good condition, refinish it, sell it for a lot of money. And this person had a round oak table, and it was 60 inches. It was great. It was veneer, which is not as good as solid oak. But, you know, people were selling them for $600, $1,000, and now they're not selling at that price anymore. This chapter, it was a warning. All sad things are just like this. And that title maybe doesn't make a lot of sense out of context, but it's talking about the problem of reproductions. And there are a lot of reproductions out there in just about every field. And the author of this book, Fake, Fraud, or Genuine, said, you can't always be in the know. And that's a really important idea because an antique dealer can sell everything from industrial products to electrical to glass to silver to wood furniture and iron and farm implement, and nobody can be an expert on everything. In fact, one of the stories in the book is that one of the appraisers from Antique Roadshow comes into Avery's booth and picks up a picture and says, well, I think it's this. And this guy, you know, he's the Roadshow appraiser. He's written a book about objects like this, about pictures, and he's not certain of it. So this idea of research is just going to be coming up again and again. So we can't always be in the know, but you can always be suspicious. And so, you know, I don't want people to be afraid of buying antiques because there's reproductions out there. We can all, even if we're not experts, you know, examine the object that we're looking at. So here, for example, is a dresser. It's walnut and chestnut, and the lighter wood is chestnut colored. Well, in 1904, there was a blight of American chestnut trees. So if you know a fact like that, and Avery knows a ton of these facts, you know that this dresser has to be made before 1904, because after 1904, chestnut wood, you know, really became unavailable. The other wood in it is walnut. And, you know, just a quick history, when Americans started making things, they used up all the pine. They cut all those trees down. That wood was gone. So they went to walnut. So about 1870 or so, walnut was the really big wood. All the walnut trees were cut down. They couldn't be used commercially anymore. So 1900, oak is becoming the big wood. And so just looking at something like the wood that a wooden object is made out of gives you a hint about it. There's, of course, style items that will help us identify the age. And later on, I'll show you another picture of how you really have to look at the bottoms and sides to evaluate. But looking at those things help you be a more confident buyer. Another story is just a little pitcher, like a milk pitcher that somebody's using. And so Avery, the big antique dealer, he looks to see if there's any wear right under the lip. Because of course, when you're using that pitcher all the time for 100 years, there's going to be, you know, even if it's not a chip, there's going to be a little sign that there was wear there. So we have to get used to looking at our objects and seeing what they can tell us. Okay, hot potato is the chapter about auctions. How many of you have been to an auction? Okay. Coolest, funnest thing, if you go to auctions, you won't ever gamble, because an auction, the thrill of the hit is so fun there, you don't have to gamble. And there's so many interesting people there at the auction. He talks about in the chapter how he actually sits in the back. I'm sorry, he actually sits in the very front of the auction. Now, some people would say, well, why is the antique dealer sitting in the front? Because the auctioneer, you don't want to show other people what you're bidding on. But those of you who have been to an auction know that there's a real interesting chemistry that goes on between the auctioneer and the audience, or the people who are helping the auctioneer. And so many times it's just a wink or a finger nod, the smallest sign, so that other people don't know who's bidding. Generally it's not that you're waving your hand like that, although this chapter also talks about how that is a technique. One of his friends just bowls over the audience. If he wants something, usually people are reluctant to make the first bid. He'll make the bid right away, and any bid that follows, he counters so that everybody in the audience knows that he's buying all of the white ironstone or whatever it is that's at that auction. So auctions are really interesting, and we do have several auction houses in the area where you can go to them. And you don't have to worry about just sneezing and buying something. That, unless you have that eye contact, they're not going to worry about your signal. A quote here, buyers think that they will get something cheap because prices are not fixed, while sellers think that they'll earn high prices since there's competition. So that's an interesting characteristic about auctions. There's really two types of auctions. An English style auction is like this, where this person bids $2 and this one bids $4, and it goes to the highest bidder. A Dutch auction is the opposite, where the price starts high and it goes low until somebody buys it. And you see this now with holiday clearance merchandise. This week it's $50, next week it's $40, and the week after that is $20. So that's actually a form of a Dutch auction. All right, well, Avery's been collecting all of this good stuff and trying to keep his family going, and actually his house is stuff, his garage is stuff, and he actually has taken off time from shows because he's got to clear out this stuff because nobody can move in his house. So he goes to the York County Classic Show, one of these classic, really important antique shows. On the left-hand side, you see some pictures from the website, and they were really small. I couldn't make them any bigger. But you'll notice there's not a lot of stuff in there, those three pictures. These are the really high-end dealers. If you want to know who the important dealers are, it's the ones who don't have any stuff to sell. They call this the living room look. And there's really, maybe 30 items that they're selling. Now, those may have a high profit margin, but they only have 30 items. Avery is just breaking into this top tier of antiques. So he has two andirons, he has yellowware, he has child's leather gloves and mittens, a wood butter press, sawdust stuffed horse, blanket chest, 2 of them, miniature pewter whale oil lamps, 5 of them, ovoid judge, Wedgwood chamber pot, mocha-ware bottles, flask, daguerreotype sampler, 2 types of redware, Victorian silver plate, American Indian bark basket, beaded purse, old signs, candle snuffers, 3 of them, youth chairs, oil portraits, 3 of them, and he has over 300 items. So this is part of that behind-the-scenes look. when the showrunners walk in, or when they're scheduling the show, they put him in the back. He's bringing too much stuff. He's not doing that living room look. And so his status is not quite as high. And again, just a reminder that this is a business for him. He's got to find that killer stuff to make a reputation for himself, so the high-end collectors want to deal with him. So he sold, and imagine packing up all of this stuff into your truck, 300 items, 19 of them sold. Now he actually did, money-wise, he did okay, but that's just another thing with antiques. Maybe somebody buys something for $20 and sells it for $100. Oh my gosh, how could you do better than that? But he probably spent 6 hours at an auction for that. And how many shows did he have to go to before he could actually sell that object? Pickers, which I've watched to watch it, but the thing that gets me about that show is, bam, I can sell that for $300. Well, maybe you can, but it could take you 5 years to sell it at $300. And if it's been hanging around for more than a short time, somebody probably is going to want to discount that price even before they buy it. So that certainty, I can sell this at $432.15, seems to me just really unrealistic. It makes a good entertaining show, but certainly this was not Avery's experience. All right, rarities, repros, condition, and knowledge, eBay. In 2009, there were 88 million users. In 2019, there's 182 million dealers. 182 million users of eBay. The book tells us eBay changed the nature of rare and antiques and rendered dealers' esoteric knowledge less important, at least for some objects. And that's what eBay's done. That thing that you remember from your childhood from 30 years ago, you can describe it and find it on eBay. You literally have a worldwide market on eBay. However, repros, you don't necessarily have a dealer whose reputation is based on finding you just the best stuff. So there are tons of reproductions on eBay. Condition is a problem. Even if you can return it and everything, condition is always a problem. And you have to have knowledge. Is this really the thing that somebody says that it is? And all sorts of things are mislabeled on eBay. A dealer friend of Avery's talks about price guides and says, you don't learn how to value things in your own mind. And pricing in antiques is just very complicated. So price guides are a help, but this person really, does not like them. Okay, gold is where you find it, looking for killer stuff. And he actually says, surprisingly, and he did sell on eBay for a short time but left it, but he says, I do my best in high-end antique stores. You get the best deals from the best dealers. And here's an example of something which is kind of a unique thing. It's actually an oil lamp, but it's a certain kind of oil lamp called a peg lamp. Because we certainly wouldn't want to waste our candlestick, but it'd be really nice to have this oil lamp that's not going to burn down all the time. So what you did was take the peg lamp and stick it in your candlestick, and now you've just updated your candlestick to this fancy new technology of using oil. And And actually, I think that candlestick is way too new for the peg lamp. It really should be more like the one that I showed you at the beginning, a beehive type brass candlestick. But that's one of the items that he picks up. He says, you can buy everything because it's all priced less than it's worth, but you tie up all your money in a perfume bottle that you get for $35 and sell on eBay for $100. I don't want to be dealing with that. It's not that you can't make some money doing that, but remember, he's a high-end dealer trying to become, you know, somebody who serves collectors, and he really can't tie up his stuff, his money, with these very more common items. Here's a picture of the Kino brothers, as you all recognize. The pilot was done in 1992. WGBH started airing it in 1996. The roadshow effects are, it's a celebration of luck without knowledge, you know, and almost everybody who goes there doesn't know what they have. And then the effect on the antique business is that people are buying with their wallets now, not with their hearts. They used to collect for the love of it. Now they are doing it for an investment. And one of the themes in the book, which is really, really big, is that Avery loves the stuff. He loves the history. He loves the stories behind it. And Roadshow, it has done a lot about making people aware of antiques, but it's shifted that emphasis so much on money. And even the executive producer says, we have unrealistically raised people's expectations. Here's a couple statistics. 7,000 ticket holders. They can bring 2 items each apiece, so that's 14,000 items. There's 70 to 80 experts working on the show for 10 hours. Out of that 14,000 items, 50 objects are showcased, and your odds are about 0.5% of having something significant that gets aired. Another interesting characteristic, the length of the appraisals is about 30 seconds. So all of these people are waiting in line to spend about 30 seconds with the dealer. But that does show you why we get that skewed picture. But it makes sense too. You know, maybe somebody on Roadshow discovers a Tiffany lamp, but you know, how many of us own Tiffany lamps now? They're expensive now, but they were expensive back then, and there's not that many of them. Okay, killer stuff. What Avery loves are these blanket chests. These are 2 pictures of a 6 blanket chest, and it's 6 boards, 4 sides, a top and a bottom. These go back to about the 1700s, and it's, for whatever reason, it's what he loves. Most people look at him and say, ooh, not too much to look at, but he actually really loves them. And he does tell a really, really interesting story. He was at an auction where there was a blanket chest. It was an auction with a catalog, and they estimated it would sell for $1,000 to $1,500. The chest he was bidding on was so ugly that the auctioneer was asking $300, and it looked like he was going to buy this for just $300, which he was all excited about. Somebody else saw him bidding and started bidding up the price, so it sold finally for $2,500. He did buy the blanket chest for $2,500. In addition to that, with an auction, there's often a buyer's premium, which in this case was 17%. So what's really interesting, though, is why he bought it. This particular chest had some carving, like you see on that top picture, and actually this chest is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And he thought that his chest, the one that he was bought, was by the same woodmaker who made this one. And there was a clue in the carving that he thought it really was the same guy. And that guy was named Charles Tilden. He arrived in the U.S. in 1634, and he lived for only 7 years. So what Avery does is go to another museum, the Cudworth House Museum, and they have the key Tilden piece, a trunk that he carved that had an unbroken provenance. So they knew that he had done that. He was looking for the same type of carving, which he found. So he was pretty certain that his chest was by that same person. And so it could have been worth $170,000, $280,000. You just don't know until it goes to an auction, and anything can happen at an auction. But he ends with kind of a sad line saying, but people don't recognize this anymore, and they don't care about it. And maybe there's a collector there for about it, but by and large, people don't care about it. And so it was sad. In contrast, he talks about, here's the first edition of the Superman comic book. That's selling for $3 million in 2014. And this great part of our heritage is not worth a lot. Kurt Avery, Captain Antiques, has no secret power to success, no superpower, just the power of his knowledge, the power of his passion, and the power of showing up. So again, this whole idea of knowledge. Here was a killer object that he found. This is a yarn winder. It's actually a shaker yarn winder. Very rare. Anything shaker is really, really good. He buys it for $65 and sells it for $6,500. Yes, except his dog got sick and the vet's bill was $7,000. So, again, the book just keeps reminding us of that business aspect of it.
Yeah.
All right.
55.
The elephant in the room, prices. The antique market is not good right now, but that's all right. We'll talk about that. Why is it not good? It's a perfect storm that we're experiencing. Online, we can get anything. People's lifestyles are changing. They're building houses without dining rooms. How can you not have a dining room? But, they're doing that. People are going out rather than for a big party instead of having everybody come to the house. The whole decluttering spirit. Decorating trends. Any color right now is out. Gray is in. So, however, wouldn't a beautiful brass candlestick look nice in that gray interior? And then a shocking fact, 10,000 baby boomers are retiring each day. 10,000. And that's why there's so many estate sales, why the market is flooded with stuff, because everybody's downsizing and our kids don't want it. An interesting question, what is an antique? It used to be 100 years old. Harry Rinker, who writes books and antique columns, wrote a column saying anything made before 1963 should be considered antique. He revised it and now says anything made before 1980. So, all right. A couple points, 5 points to conclude with. Number one, beware of reproductions, especially online. You remember that beautiful butter churn? That was a reproduction. The picture that I showed you was a reproduction. 1-quart butter churn. It does say antique style, which is actually good that they give you some kind of warning. But here, for example, it shows you a new one and an old one and shows you the detail of the new and the old. And this is available on Ruby Lane. RubyLane.com is an online antique website. And I think they really have very good quality on there. But one of the things that they have that you maybe have never noticed is down at the bottom of the page it says Real or Repro. When you click on that, you go to another site called Real or Repro, which gives you excellent articles about what's being reproduced and how to identify the reproductions from the originals. So just like Avery, he does his research. This is a really nice free place that we can go to do our research. RubyLane.com, you can shop, but go down to the bottom of the page where it says Real or Repro. Okay, number 2, be skeptical shopping online. I put in my first antique clock and it's worth $300. Oh no, it's worth $3,000. No, it's worth $500, $400, $1,250, $4,000. This is, the best one. But one of the manipulations that go on online, if anybody's interested, is just, a dealer will sell an object for very minimal money, $10, and then charge you $50 shipping. So that's bad because it manipulates the prices which are compiled and monitored, but you really, really have to be careful. And then of course you have to pay attention to condition. So just be skeptical when you're online. Okay, number 3, visit shows, flea markets, auctions, and museums. We're so lucky to have the flea market just down the line. We can get anything, our Life magazines, our Halloween decorations. Sandwich, actually, some of you may know that there used to be an antique market, fair, flea market in Sandwich, which is back. And so those are great because all of these things you can pick up. One of those lamps, it's pretty easy to tell is a reproduction. If you pick it up, the glass feels different, the sheen is different, the weight is different. So wherever you go, pick up stuff because that's going to make you a much better shopper. Here's some other pictures from the Sandwich flea market, and you can find everything there. Here's some pictures from an auction. Go to an auction if you've never been to an auction, a farm auction especially. It's such fun to see the stuff, and some of the auctioneers will even give you a lesson before the auction. If you're reticent about participating, they'll talk to you about how to do that. So auctions are great fun. We've got the Fox Valley Antique Show, and it's coming up March 14th and 15th. You'll notice on the right, there's somebody that has one of those living room sets, not too much stuff there. The one on the left is maybe more traditional with a lot more stuff. So you'll see both types at Fox Valley. But one of the things that I really, really recommend is if you go to the Fox Valley show, talk to the dealers. They know so much, and they're very willing to talk to you about it. Explain why this pot costs $800 instead of $80. And when you have that knowledge, it's so much easier to appreciate the difference. Before I was talking about we have to learn how to read our objects. Here's a really nice early 1800s chest. And whether or not you like the look of it, the quality and the surface is so interesting. It's cherry, it's got an inlay. And so what I do, I look at the underside of of the drawer, and you notice the lines, the grooves that have been carved in from over 100 years of using that drawer. You're not ever going to find that in a reproduction. Or if you find it, you know, it might not look right. The edges, how the front of the drawer is joined to the side. Each one of those is a hand dovetailed joint that holds that together, and that drawer is going to stick together. We were in a hotel a week ago, and I took a picture of how the staples were stuck in on the side. And you know, all the less expensive furniture is not going to last. The quality of the wood is not the same. Okay, of course you can learn at the library. One of the great things that the library has is an antique database. So you go to the web page and you click on research, online research, and then you click on antiques. You have to put in your library card number and your password, and the library can help you with the password if you don't know that. You do have to put that in, but then you go into Price It, Antiques and Collectibles. And so we can search in that database. So, you know, for an example, I typed in Batavia, and I got 671 items. Most of them came from online auctions, which really means eBay, but there was an online retail sale and a couple auction house sales. And so I find a wind engine and pump company catalog and a church bench, and you know, several hundred other items. You can learn about your items this way. And not only can you research the price of items, but they also have additional resources. This is on the front page where they're featuring this. And so probably an issue that some of us have is, how do I get rid of my collector plates? And so you click on it, and here's a link to one of Harry Rinker's columns where he talks about collector plates. All right, why antiques? Number one, they are unique. They're probably unique in how they were made, but especially they're unique in the 50 or 100 or 200 or 25 years that it has. You can see what kind of life it had before you. Antiques, they're not retaining the massive values of many years ago, but antiques do have value as a quality item that you can, you know, resell. One antique shop that I know tells college kids, buy your stuff here because you can sell it afterwards. Your mass-produced stuff, it's going to fall apart before you can ever do anything with it. You know, longevity. That item is going to be around for a long time. You have the thrill of the hunt of finding that perfect object. It's environmentally sound. These trees were cut down 100 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever. It just makes sense for us to keep using it. And, you know, I don't think we can underestimate that. And of course, it's got that historical value. So, you know, I just end with a couple postcards that I found. There's Wilson Street looking west, and here's a trolley car coming into Geneva around the curve. I think that's by the Forest Preserve. And then I love the picture of the church with the road racers zipping by. Some of these had the date of about 1913 on them. So, you know, that postcard is 100 years old already. And how interesting, that whole historical thing. So, I went over time, so I will just stop. But, you know, if any of you would like to ask any questions, that's fine. But thank you very much for listening. It was really fun to talk about it.
That's right.
Really, I'm not.
It's just I'm not.